David Rodriguez never expected his police badge to be replaced by a plastic dashboard light, but some missions never truly end. They just change vehicles. At 2:37 a.m. on a rain-soaked Friday night in Phoenix, David pulled up to a downtown bar where a young woman stood crying under a broken streetlight. Her name was Jessica. She was 22, and she was about to change everything David thought he knew about saving people. This wasn't just another ride. It was the beginning of understanding that sometimes the most important police work happens after you turn in your badge. For 15 years, David had served and protected from behind the wheel of a squad car. Now, driving for Uber on the midnight shift, he was discovering that the real emergencies don't always come with sirens. David's alarm went off at 10:30 p.m., same as it had for the past 8 months since his medical retirement from the Phoenix Police Department. The bullet fragment lodged near his spine had ended his career, but not his calling. At 53, he was too young to stop serving and too experienced to ignore the pull of the night streets. His wife, Elena, kissed him goodbye as he grabbed his coffee and keys. "Stay safe out there, mi amor," she whispered, same words she'd said for 27 years of marriage. The only difference now was that instead of a gun belt and radio, David carried phone chargers, water bottles, and tissues, the new tools of his trade. The first few rides were typical Friday night fare. College students heading to parties, young professionals ending dates, shift workers going home from restaurants and hospitals. David kept the conversation light, the music low, and his eyes on the road and mirrors. Old habits from his police days that served him well in civilian life. But Phoenix after midnight was different from the daylight city. It revealed its secrets slowly, one ride at a time. Jessica climbed into David's Honda Accord with mascara streaks painting black rivers down her cheeks. She gave him an address in Tempe and immediately started typing furiously on her phone, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "You okay back there?" David asked gently, adjusting his rearview mirror to keep an eye on her. "I'm fine," Jessica lied, her voice cracking like thin ice. "Just boyfriend troubles." David had interviewed enough people in crisis to recognize when someone was anything but fine. Jessica's hands were shaking. She kept looking over her shoulder, and she'd asked him to drive around the block twice before approaching her destination. 20 minutes into what should have been a 12-minute ride, Jessica finally spoke. "Can you just keep driving? I'll pay for the extra time. I can't go home yet." "What's at home?" David asked, pulling into an all-night diner parking lot. "My boyfriend, ex-boyfriend. He said he'd be waiting for me." Jessica's voice dropped to a whisper. "He said if I broke up with him, he'd make sure I regretted it." David's police instincts kicked in instantly. He turned off the meter, shifted into park, and faced his passenger. "Has he hurt you before?" Jessica nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "Not badly, just when he gets angry, when he drinks." David spent the next hour in that parking lot, not as an Uber driver, but as what he'd always been, a protector. He helped Jessica call her sister, waited while she packed a bag under police escort, and drove her to a safe place. He never charged her for the ride. Word spread through Phoenix's night community the way good news always does. Quietly, from one person who needed help to another. David's Honda became known as the safe ride, the car where people could talk about things they couldn't tell anyone else. There was Marcus, the 19-year-old gay kid whose parents had kicked him out, spending his nights on friends' couches and calling David when he needed to get across town to his second job at a 24-hour gym. David started keeping granola bars and bottled water in his car. Maria, a nurse leaving her shift at 3 a.m., who'd been sexually harassed by a colleague and was too afraid to report it. She rode with David twice a week for a month, slowly building the courage to speak up. David listened, offered resources, and celebrated with her when she finally filed her complaint. Tommy, a veteran dealing with PTSD, who called David during panic attacks because the steady conversation and familiar routine of a car ride helped calm his anxiety. David learned to recognize the signs, knew when to talk and when to stay quiet, when to take the long way home. Each ride taught David something new about the invisible crises happening all around him. His car became a mobile confessional, a therapy session, a safe harbor. Everything his police cruiser had been, but without the authority and with twice the trust. David developed his own code for the night shift. No ride was too short or too long. No story was too small or too strange. No person was beyond help, even if they didn't ask for it directly. He kept emergency supplies in his trunk, first aid kit, phone chargers for every type of device, feminine hygiene products, snacks, water, blankets, and business cards for local crisis hotlines. His glove compartment held tissues, anti-anxiety mints, and a notebook where he wrote down resources for people who needed them. The notebook became David's mission log. Instead of incident reports, he tracked success stories. Jessica had gotten a restraining order and was back in school. Marcus had reconciled with his parents and was saving money for college. Maria had been promoted to charge nurse. Tommy was volunteering with other veterans. Elena noticed the changes in her husband. He came home from his Uber shifts, energized instead of drained, purposeful instead of aimless. "You're yourself again," she told him one morning as he showed her a thank you card from a passenger. "This is who you were always meant to be." Not every night ended with success stories. David learned that the hard way on a Tuesday night in November when he picked up a call from a downtown hotel. Ryan was 26, well-dressed, and completely drunk. He wanted to go to the Roosevelt Bridge, claimed he was meeting friends there. David's instincts immediately went on alert. Nobody met friends at a bridge at 2 a.m. During the drive, Ryan talked about his job, his recent breakup, his mounting debt. He mentioned that things would be easier for everyone if he just disappeared. David had heard similar language during his police career, usually in welfare check calls that required delicate handling. Instead of driving to the bridge, David pulled into a 24-hour diner. "I need coffee," he lied. "You want some?" Over coffee and pie, David listened to Ryan's story. Failed business, broken relationship, crushing student loans, parents who'd stopped speaking to him. Ryan had come to Phoenix to start over and instead felt more lost than ever. "I was going to jump," Ryan admitted finally. "From the bridge, tonight." David didn't lecture or judge. He shared his own story, the injury that ended his police career, the depression that followed, the nights he'd wondered if Elena and their kids would be better off without him. He talked about the slow process of rebuilding purpose, finding new ways to matter. When the sun came up, Ryan was still alive. David drove him to a crisis center, waited while he checked in, and gave him his personal phone number. "Call me if you need a ride anywhere," David said. Day or night. Ryan did call several times. 6 months later, he sent David a wedding invitation. David wasn't working alone. Elena became his unofficial dispatcher, taking calls from regulars who had David's personal number. Their kitchen table turned into command central, with phone chargers, business cards for social services, and a calendar tracking check-in calls with frequent passengers. Other drivers started reaching out to David for advice. How do you handle someone who's obviously being abused? What do you do when a passenger seems suicidal? David found himself training other drivers, sharing the techniques he'd learned both as a police officer and as someone who'd been in crisis himself. The network grew organically. Dr. Sarah Chen, an emergency room physician, started referring patients to David when they needed safe transportation to shelters or treatment centers. Father Martinez at St. Catherine's Church kept David's number for parishioners who needed rides to job interviews or court appearances. Linda at the crisis hotline knew to ask callers if they needed transportation to safety. David's Honda became an unofficial emergency vehicle, filling gaps in the city's safety net that nobody else was addressing. The local news caught wind of David's story when Jessica, now a social work student, nominated him for a community service award. Officer Rodriguez never stopped being a police officer, she said during the ceremony. He just expanded his definition of community policing. The story went viral on social media, with dozens of David's passengers sharing their own experiences. Uber Angel began trending in Phoenix, though David cringed at the nickname. "I'm just a driver," he insisted. "People help themselves. I just give them rides." But the recognition brought new opportunities. Uber featured David in a national safety campaign. The Phoenix Police Department invited him to speak at community events about alternative approaches to crisis intervention. Local colleges asked him to address criminal justice classes about serving communities in non-traditional ways. David turned down most media requests, but accepted speaking engagements where he could talk about the real work, the listening, the connecting, the simple act of being present when someone needed help. On a quiet Thursday night in December, exactly 1 year after he'd started driving, David sat in his car outside Terminal 4 at Sky Harbor Airport, waiting for a ride request. The dashboard clock read 11:47 p.m. In 13 minutes, he'd officially been an Uber driver longer than he'd been retired from the police force. His phone buzzed with a pickup request from a familiar address, the crisis center where he'd taken Ryan 11 months earlier. The passenger name was new, but David had learned that the center staff sometimes used the service to transport clients who needed safe rides to transitional housing or treatment facilities. As he drove across Phoenix, David reflected on the strange journey that had brought him here. A bullet fragment had ended one career, but revealed another calling. The badge might be gone, but the mission continued, just with different tools, different rules, and definitely different hours. His phone rang as he pulled up to the center. It was Ryan, calling from Seattle, where he'd moved for a new job. "Hey, Officer Rodriguez," Ryan said, using the title David no longer held, but somehow still carried. "I just wanted to check in. 1 year clean and sober today. Getting married next month. I know you probably don't remember, but—" "I remember," David interrupted. "Every ride, every person, every story. You saved my life that night." "You saved your own life," David corrected. "I just gave you a ride." After hanging up, David sat in his car for a moment, watching late-night travelers, wheeling their luggage through the automatic doors of the airport. Each person carrying their own story, their own destination, their own reason for traveling through the darkness towards something they hoped would be better. His passenger emerged from the crisis center, a young man about Ryan's age, carrying a backpack and looking uncertain. David got out to open the door, introduced himself, and asked where they were headed. "Transitional housing," the passenger said quietly. "Fresh start." "Fresh starts are good," David replied, pulling away from the curb. "I'm a big believer in second chances." As they drove through Phoenix's neon-lit streets, David realized that some missions never really end. They just evolve, adapt, and find new ways to serve. The city still needed protecting, people still needed helping, and David Rodriguez was exactly where he was supposed to be. Behind the wheel, on the night shift, ready for whatever call came next. The radio played softly as they headed toward morning, toward hope, toward all the possibilities that waited on the other side of midnight. In the rear-view mirror, David could see his passenger looking out the window at the city lights, probably wondering what came next. David knew the answer. One ride at a time, one story at a time, one life at a time. The same way it had always been, the same way it would always be. His phone buzzed with another ride request. David smiled and headed toward the pickup location, ready to serve and protect in whatever way the night required.